Hello, my friends, and welcome back to our Discover Your Season of Transformation Soulful Reflections. And this week, we are opening a new season of Order and Flow, where we are exploring the reflection of what happens when we lose touch with our natural rhythm. So many of us spend so much time responding to responsibilities, expectations, and the pace of everyday life that we slowly drift away from ourselves, our bodies, our routine, our breath, most importantly. And sometimes we don't even notice when it's actually happening because we're in that like autopilot, right? And that's why I'm especially grateful to have Rosalie joining me today here in the corner. Rosalie is a spiritual life coach and Reiki master. And one of the things I most admire about her is the way she helps people slow down enough to hear themselves once again. And I have a feeling this conversation is one of many all of us need. Now, Rosalie, for those who may be meeting you for the first time, would you maybe introduce yourself a little bit? Maybe share a little bit of what you do, your work, and your just style of healing, teaching?
Thank you so much, Anastasia. I'm truly grateful to be here. I'm Rosalie. I'm a certified spiritual life coach, Reiki master, and I use those two modalities to not just guide people back to their innermost selves, but also ground them in their lives because we can do all of those, you know, we can have the downloads and the meditations and things like that, but it doesn't really truly matter until we ground it into our everyday life and presence. And so part of my process is just helping people excavate through who they are not and who they've been taught to be and rediscover who they truly are at their soul's essence.
Thank you so much, Rosalie. I'm super excited to have you here and to explore the three reflections I've pulled ahead of this soulful conversation. And later on, we'll go through a bit of a guided practice to end the conversations with Rosalie. But for now, let's kind of come back to our little, I was going to say little center, but to come back to our breath, maybe take a few breaths together with me. We'll start off with one deep, deep breath because we are talking about rhythm. So let's kind of come back to our center with just one big breath in and out. Maybe two more. One, out, and last one in and out. I think I needed that one more than you guys did. So coming back to our soulful conversation now. So when I usually pull reflections right ahead of these soulful messages, and the three reflections I want to kind of focus on today, I have here the Queen of Swords, Seven of Wands, and the Emperor, and they all invite different aspects and different. They provide different insights to us during this season, of which we're going to explore one by one. The first one that stood out to me here for this season is Seven of Wands. Right away, as you can see, the imagery here is this archetype is kind of protecting their energy, okay? Protecting their little, whether it's peace of mind, whether it's whatever they've created. This one is more about boundaries. And I feel like this is about protecting our space, our mindset, our boundaries. And there's often times when we have to say no to certain things, right? To kind of protect our boundaries. And sometimes we have to decide what to say yes to. And sometimes we become so busy also protecting everything around us that we forget to protect our own peace. There's often than not, we have responsibilities, we have different delegations or different just priorities that we have to focus on that we forget to realize. Actually, we don't realize how much we're carrying, right? So we become, again, I'm going to say, we become so busy protecting everything around us that we forget to protect our own peace, our own sanctuary. Okay. So have you noticed that in your work, how do we begin recognizing specifically when we're living from obligation instead of genuine alignment? Okay, so with Seven of Wands, again, how do you recognize that we're living from that space of that we feel obligated to do something versus we genuinely are doing it because we are aligned to it? And that maybe there is no need to protect our boundaries in a firm way when we know we're kind of have that alignment.
Yeah, that's a very juicy, deep conversation and question. Um, yes, this is very important. I feel like a lot of people talk about this topic, not just in the spiritual community, but just for life in general, because we are humans and we thrive in relationships with other humans. And so when those are beginning to feel chaotic or not peaceful, then it affects us very deeply. And so,
Mhm.
this idea of having to protect our energy comes from a place of disconnection, of fear, of wanting to fit in, and which is valid, right? Because as we come into this world and we go through life, we wouldn't be able to, it's wired into our DNA to be accepted and have connection and feel that safety and love from others. So when it doesn't happen, or if there's chaos or conflict involved, then it doesn't feel good. But part of my work is helping people realize, and this is what I've realized for myself, is that you can operate from a state of um, that wholeness, that purity from within, no matter what is going on in your life. And so
Mhm.
instead of living life in a state of reaction to anything and everything that's happening around you, including relationships, how people interact with others, you come from this state of presence, of awareness of your true essence. So we're never really disconnected. It's just that we lack the awareness and understanding that we are,
Mhm.
which brings that illusion of divide, of I have to prove myself to fit in. I have to protect my energy or something bad will happen to me. When really, at a truth really is you are completely loved, you are completely whole. Everything will be okay. Like there's the self acceptance of everything. Like we've all heard, right? We're spiritual beings having that human experience.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the times people are stuck in the mental plane and overthinking things constantly, saying, should I do this? I should do that. Well, what will people think if I don't do that? What will that mean about me if I'm not able to reach that goal? All of these things. Whereas if you begin to know yourself from within, if you begin to accept that part of you is part of the whole of all that is, of the divine, and you begin to surrender the control to God, because ultimately God places the desires in our heart. The divine places those desires in our heart, and we won't truly know what those desires are that are truly right for us if we don't open ourselves up to receiving them.
I start thinking about being more discerning about our desires. And that's where I went into a little bit of a rabbit hole there, where I'm like, okay, so we have certain desires, right? But how do we know our desires are in alignment or not? But what if the heart wants something? And how do you know that's the heart speaking and not the ego or some sort of unhealed version of you that wants to like explore something from the past? Queen of Swords is so so in resonance with this topic because Queen of Swords is like us not only learning how to come back to our center and becoming more discerning, but also becoming more wise about what is tugging on our desires, you know, the nature of our desires. The Queen of Swords is like very, it can go both ways. This energy can be expressed in a way where it's like we become more equipped, wise, and discerning about our desires, and also listening and trusting our own intuition. Or it could also flip on the other side where we become, especially with Seven of Swords, we become too overprotective, overbearing about everything and all the choices, and kind of distance ourselves from all people. And we can get into the energy of like, I don't need anyone. And I need to control everything around me. But again, where's the trust in the divine? Where's that higher connection to your, you know, again, there's so many layers to this that we can, I feel like we can explore forever.
There's a lot there. And I feel like such a great conversation. I mean, question, Anastasia, because these are the questions that I feel like we have growing up as young adults, as children, as people just navigating the world and life. And I know, I don't know if anyone else, I'm sure we can resonate with this, is like, what is the answer? Like, and it seems like the adults don't really know. So they kind of tell you something, but then you find that not to be true. And I think just as a seeker of truth, naturally, my entire life, and I think that's what children are too, which is why children are so curious, is just to continue to discover and ask questions and deepen your understanding of things, which we can't do if we don't have a level of humility, if we don't have a level of self-awareness and accountability to recognize what we don't know. Because as adults, sometimes I feel like we try to act like we know it all, we can figure it out, it's all on us to, kind of take it on. Whereas when you talk about discernment, that discernment will really come when you plug into and deepen your awareness of being one with God and asking for that guidance. That's what's going to make you the most powerful, because we have a limited perspective as humans here on earth. And so God has the ultimate perspective, the broadest perspective that we can't even imagine. And so we have to be aware of and humble enough to know I need to ask for guidance. I need to ask for that divine guidance. I need to open myself up to receiving that. And so there's lots of things going on with this question, is because, well, then how do I receive those messages? You can receive, everybody's receiving those messages, but because our body is a physical vessel and our energetic system can hold denseness, there are things that are coming in but might not truly be reaching us in the way they're meant to. And so we might take something as, oh, it was meant for me to do this, but then it was actually wrong. And then we tell ourselves God isn't real. You know what I mean? Like all these bad things that kind of go into this cycle of despair and hopelessness and disconnection and I'm alone, right? Whereas again, it's building self-trust. And how do you build self-trust? The self-trust that you're looking for is really your trust in who you truly are. And you can never really have that self-trust if you don't know who you are in God. Clearing your vessel to receive those messages more clearly. Because, and it's kind of like, well, which one comes first? Like, do I start connecting with God more? Do I start working on myself more? Whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Just start. It's like, build that relationship with God and actively know who you are within. And when you begin to start that journey of excavating who you are, like releasing the things that you're not, naturally that'll bring you closer to God. And because we've grown up in this society and culture, and maybe not everybody, but some of us have this tendency to kind of beat ourselves up over not doing the right thing and saying like, oh, see, I didn't know, and all these things. But we have to remember, like, God never doesn't make any mistakes. Like, there are things always for a reason. I truly believe that. And when we cannot see the reason, doesn't mean that it was a mistake. It means, again, we have this limited human perspective. And if there's something that's bringing us grief, suffering, sadness, whatever it might be, um, lack of forgiveness, any of those things, we have to ask God for the guidance to see those things with more clarity. We have this narrative and message in our mind about what certain situations mean, but instead of holding on to our own reasoning and understanding about them, we have to open ourselves up to asking for clarity and understanding in God's eyes and ask God to show us through God's eyes what this situation means and it's um, what his plan is for us. Because as soon as we try to take it all on, we lose, which is also part of my work, helping people tap into that their soul essence and being open to receiving those messages more clearly. So you begin to emit and live from that state of being, which then creates a different experience for yourself, which then transforms you into someone new. And so, but we never allow ourselves to do that if we're constantly stuck in the past and our limitations and what we can't do and what we should do. Because when you live in that alignment, the things that are not meant for you will naturally fall away. And you begin to live in this frequency where those lower, denser experiences are no longer a match, are no longer even existing where you're operating from currently. So instead of operating from a state of fear of I have to protect myself, I can't do that, I don't know if those people are good for me, just listen to God and listen to what God is telling you. Do that. And from what I've seen in my own experience and other people's lives, is when you live from that alignment, you are protected because you're living in your highest truth. You're living in the deepest awareness and closeness with God, as opposed to when you're living from lack and illusion and separation, your awareness is separated from knowing God. Your frequency vibrates lower and you begin to take actions from that state. And so you naturally are unprotected. You naturally attract people from that low vibration. You naturally go and do things from that low vibrational state and awareness. And it's almost like you don't even have to protect yourself at that point when you
Right.
are following your faith and trust in your highest truth.
Very closely, and I'm picking it up as well now, very closely it validates what you're saying too, of naturally having that protective barrier, because even this archetype's energy, you can even feel how she's not panicking. She's not in the position of trying to fight off whatever is coming into her bubble. She's literally in her bubble. And that bubble is um, that veil or unseen protection, whether it's the divine, higher self, but I think it's the divine or just higher protective barrier that no matter what is happening outside of you, I will be whole. Opening your heart, I feel like, and allowing God into your life is a protection of its own, I feel like. So I can kind of see that here too. And also to that, I noticed how in this tarot card, we have a little cup here, which I don't often notice. But cups is like, it's that emotional, um, it could be emotions, it could be love, it could be self-love. And I notice how it's like locked in a little cage here. So swords is typically mental. So we're having that discernment, we're having the wisdom, but for some reason, not for some reason, but sometimes we lock our heart or we leave our heart out from making certain decisions. And so sometimes we lead with, I know what's right, I'm going to go this way. And we kind of lock our heart out of decision making. While I'm getting now that we need to kind of infuse both, kind of have the mentals and the heart working together. that bubble kind of ignited my thought process, Rosalie, when you were like having that protection, having that self-trust or trust for the divine is the protection of its own. So just kind of went into that. And I also liked how you said that some of your clients, they get certain downloads, certain insights, but the most challenging part is actually following that after, or creating some sort of routine, structure, or an environment where they feel encouraged to follow whatever insight and download they receive, or set some sort of plan or routine around that download. For instance, if a download is like, oh, all of a sudden I feel inspired to create my own business, but then all of us, maybe that same person goes home and realizes, yeah, if I were to start a business right now, I don't have the right resources, I don't have the right people, I don't have the table that I need so I can record videos on or whatever, then it's all of a sudden it's like that idea or insight kind of goes on the back burner. So that leads me to the third reflection, which goes very in sync with that, is the emperor. So the emperor is like creating the routine and structure in your life that can support you with whatever journey you're on. And the reason routine structure, maybe some sort of plan that you can create in today that you can control, because there's certain things you can't control, is very relevant during this time or during the season, is because we're talking about rhythm and we're talking about order and flow. So that's the Virgo Pisces duality here, where Virgo is like, well, what can I take care of on a daily basis, which is my routine, my diet, am I drinking enough water, am I thinking the right thoughts, where am I going to go today, just like the daily day-to-day things that we think about and that we do, that we take care of, all these routines. That's like a Virgo. It's about day-to-day decision making, refining everything in this moment. But us having to kind of think about everything at the same time can feel overwhelming, and we can sometimes start controlling everything in our own life, where we're like, all right, well, I need to do this and I need to do this. If I don't do this, then this happens. And then it's like it can get very overwhelming. So that's why we need the other polarity of Pisces, where we're like, all right, well, we need to surrender the control in some aspect of our lives, because there's a higher plan for things. I can take care of my body today, drink this vitamin, or follow this plan, or create a business, but I don't need to think of everything at the same time. I don't need to create a business and think of like A to Z today. I can create a plan. And I also trust that I'm being led. And so just kind of a little bit of a taste of the Virgo Pisces polarity, and how the emperor then leads to us. Well, now what can we control? How do we create a structure around that idea that I just got? What would you specifically say to someone who feels like they're trying to keep up instead of feeling present in their day-to-day life?
I can just share. I feel like for this, like people who are trying to kind of balance the need to keep up and that present state and feeling present in their lives, I feel like it's just deeply personable to each person individually, what that looks like. I think the part that people struggle with is the clarity on, well, what is my next choice? What is my next step? And so you have to truly look at what is it that you truly want, right? Which again, that desire comes from God. God knows what you really want. And when you can really be honest and true with yourself about what that is, then you get to be the emperor, right? You get to be the empress. You get to create that life and you get to build heaven on earth. And I truly believe like that's the life that I live now and what I help my clients build. Humans are a mirror of that. We are human beings living on earth, grounded, here physically, as well as divine energetic beings receiving that light always. And it's this harmony between those two things centered through our heart space that allows us to experience that state of heaven, of bliss, of purity, of love, of acceptance. We have to be committed to this process though, because and I think once you've had your awakening, there's no way you're going to go back anyway. Like if I told myself I'm going to go back to eating junk food and like wasting away my time doing things that don't really matter to me and gossiping or whatever it was, that I did before, I just couldn't, I just wouldn't be able to, because once the lights are on, the lights like illuminate things that you won't ever see the same again. And so I think sometimes there is this middle ground where people get stuck in wanting to live this old life, but there's a new life that's waiting to be created by you. And again, you can receive the messages from God and your soul, but you have to be willing to act on them. And so you have to plan those out. And the last thing I'll say is when you execute on those items, this part matters too, is because, like, for example, God told me build a business. Okay, so my first year I built my business, I was just executing super hard, super in the masculine mode, super into like all day long, and like, you know what I mean? And so I realized, like, is this God, like, is this really what you wanted for me? Because I realized I was getting burnt out. I didn't feel good. I wasn't happy. I was spending less time with my family. And so again, it's this journey, it's this experiential thing where you a process where you have to realize like something's not quite right here. And that awareness aspect, right, of what you feel. And so when I again asked that guidance from God for that awareness and I looked within, I realized it wasn't that the steps were wrong, it was the energy I was doing them from. And again, it's that harmony, it's that union of masculine feminine energy. I was only doing the masculine in my business, and then I thought I could rest and then I'd be in my feminine energy. But that's not what God wants us to do. We need to take action on things with the energetic awareness and presence of who we truly are as a state of love and wholeness. So, for example, I know people are like, "What? That sounds so abstract. I don't know what you're talking about." It's like, so now when I take action in my business, it's not that the action items are different, right? I still um host my sound baths. I still reach out to clients. I still like record YouTube videos, whatever it might be. Although my awareness and my presence and my energy is plugged into my God state, which is knowing that I'm one and truly loved and whole by and through and with and in God. And that is what's being fitted into all the things that I create. And that's why it's an action of creating heaven on earth. Because if I took those same actions disconnected from my truest state, I would just be adding to the noise. I would just be emitting more of that low frequency of I have to do it because I was told, disconnected from who I am, not really happy with, you know what I mean? So it's like you could do the same task and have a totally different experience, totally different outcome by your state of presence and energy. I forget who said this. One of the saints said this is like, do all things with great love. And it's true. It's like everything that you do becomes an act of devotion, an act of meditation, and a practice of presence. And you become, and I teach my students this too, is like every time you come super intentional and aware with that excellence, with that precision, you don't even have to measure time anymore. You just show up that way every single moment, the best you can, to your fullest capacity and fullest being in all that you do, and bring that love and force and energy. When you look back 10 years from now, you're going to love the life that you lived. You're going to be proud of who you were. I can honestly like say that for myself too. When I like look back at my life, my earlier years where I was so disconnected from who I was like, what did I even accomplish? Like, yes, I got a college degree. Yes, I did this, but did that really mean anything to me? And I'm not saying like those things were bad, but I'm saying I was so disconnected. It didn't feel meaningful to me. But then just within the past 10 years or so, when I've really truly plugged into who I am and my truth, I'm like, look at how much more, and it isn't even about more or less. It's about, because what you'll notice is when you move from that state and presence and awareness, you end up doing exponentially more. And it's not that you did that, it's that you're creating from your fullest capacity with God involved. You're not blocking your blessings anymore. And so, but as humans, we can't wrap our brain around that sometimes. People are like, what are you talking about? I have to execute. I have to do this. I have to keep up. But really, sometimes it's doing less with more intention and presence and awareness that will bring you the results that you're looking for with more ease, more love, more gratitude, more fullness in your heart. And so there's that process, right? And again, what I help my clients with is how do I then rewire my brain to live that way? Because I spent some of my clients maybe in their 30s, some were even 50s, right? Like, how do I reprogram that?
We're talking about self-love and it being the structure and the I'm thinking of container, but it's not really container, but having self-love be the center between the two dualities, where self-love almost like infuses both of the contrasting views into this one flow. Where if we're talking about, I feel like finding your way back to yourself when we've lost that rhythm, I feel like rhythm is like, well, if I'm in one energy versus the other, how do I find my rhythm back where it's in that dance between the two, where you don't see one versus the other? It's more like I've had the discipline. I have enough discipline and routine in place to manage my day to day. But I also have that connection to the higher source to know that whatever I have established today, as long as I'm in that self-love container, or maybe in that self-love container bubble where I'm like resort to that connection. But I feel like self-love is what I'm taking out of this conversation today, of having self-love be the bubble to surround yourself in. And self-love actually, of course, comes from the higher source or higher self or source in general, because without that we feel very disconnected. But I can see how the Seven of Wands, the Queen of Swords, the Emperor play such a big role in reminding us how to connect to our natural, or not even natural, but having that protective connection to our higher self or source, to be able to ward out distractions. Maybe, the Queen of Swords is like, okay, that's beautiful. Now you are in this protective barrier or circle. How do you practice discernment as you look at our out? There's so many distractions. I can say that personal, like, we all have our distractions. How do you become discerning of what is for you, what's not for you, as you navigate this polarity of order and flow, and finding your rhythm, what works for you, what doesn't? And while you're navigating, tapping into using self-love as your anchor, self-love as your anchor, which is also tied to source. That's fuel. That's fuel. Right? Structure doesn't have to be like, this is my routine and that's how it's going to be today. Structure can look differently for all of us. Structure could be healthy boundaries. Structure could be, I have a list of items I want to do or things I want to get through today, but it doesn't mean that I don't have room to be flexible.
When you were going over the cards again and you mentioned the bubble, it was like that bubble. I feel like the bubble represents like being in, because like the bubble is in this world, but you're in the bubble. It's like being in the Bible. It says like, be in this world. God, and Jesus tells everyone, be in this world, but not of this world. And so for me, that means, yes, you're living this human experience on earth, and you're in this world, but you don't have to be of this world. And to me, that means you don't have to subscribe to the beliefs that the culture has set. You can remember who you truly are at a soul level and live from that presence instead. And I think that's what the bubble represents, is because
Mm,
even though we are one, it's naturally does kind of create separation, because
mm,
once you start living from that place of truth, people will not understand you. It's because it's not always going to make sense to people. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense to us. And so I think that's why what you're creating with your business, with Soul Essence and your community,
mhm,
as well as like what I've created in my own community at the Purifying Place, is important. It's important to come together in communion with God, with ourselves, with each other, in our highest self.
And I like how I was just writing here, perhaps an idea for next guided meditation could be reinforcing the love bubble. And I also like, this came through as you were speaking, that self-love can be very fierce. Because a lot of people, many people actually think that, self-love is like, oh, it's so woo-woo and it's so gentle. And especially when people like those masculines, like, individuals who are so much in their masculines, they're like, oh, that's for sissies. Or that's like so woo-woo, like self-love. But self-love can be very fierce too. So don't underestimate, um, how some of us are fiercely protecting our bubbles. I feel, Rosalie, the juice is flowing. I feel the creativeness of this. So I love how we are kind of dancing between the order and flow here. All right, my friends. So one thing I keep coming back to this season is that rhythm isn't something we force. Instead, it's something we remember. And before we finish our conversation today, I'd love to invite you to this short practice. I don't have the name of it, but I guess we can call it returning back to your natural rhythm. All right, so maybe perhaps settle in to where you are, within your seat, on your couch, in your car, wherever you're listening to. Take a few minutes to take the first deep breath in and out. Let's take another deep breath in and out. And I'd like to invite you to a quiet moment with yourself right now in this moment. If it feels comfortable, gently close your eyes. Allow your shoulders to soften. Relax your jaw. Feel your body supported beneath you. Feel your body, feel your chest, your tummy, your torso, your legs. Allow yourself to notice your breath. Allow it to move naturally in and out. Because your breath already knows the rhythm, and your heart already knows its rhythm as well. Nature doesn't rush here. And perhaps your soul has its own rhythm too. Today, my friend, ask yourself, where have you been forcing instead of flowing? Where have you been trying to control instead of trusting? Allow yourself to just notice the thoughts, the images that come through. Take another slow breath in and exhale. Imagine releasing just a little of the pressure you've been carrying. Today, trust that your rhythm will continue to reveal itself. One breath, one choice, one day at a time. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Notice also your body. Notice also your hands, your torso, your feet. Thank you, my friends. This was just a very quick reset from reflection to being in the present moment for just a brief moment together. All right, my friends. So today we explored what it means to return to ourselves, return to our rhythm, perhaps to protect our energy, to trust our inner wisdom, and to create a life that supports the person we are becoming. If you'd like to continue exploring your own season, I invite you to discover which of the 6 master keys of transformation your soul may be moving through today. And if Order and Flow is your season, I'd love to welcome you to our next month's virtual live activation, where we'll continue exploring these themes together through reflection, tarot, and evolutionary astrology. And of course, some guided meditations as a community. Rosalie, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your wisdom with us today. And thank you to everyone who spent this time with us. Until next time, may you find peace in the rhythm that's uniquely yours. May you trust the wisdom that quietly lives within you. And with that, thank you. And until next time, bye.